People who come here, we say, they've got to integrate. Well, integration is a two-way street. Integration is about accepting, about becoming a part of the society that you have chosen to join. And that's what is now, I would argue, is not happening in the way that it did 50, 60 years ago. We are no longer a homogenous society. We don't any longer have a shared backstory, a shared history, a shared culture. And that, I just don't think it bodes well for the future of our society.
All right, Alp, thanks for coming in.
Pleasure.
Hot topic of the moment.
It's been the hot topic of the moment for about 25 years, actually, but
yeah,
if not even before that.
Well, particular hot right now, and it's got blended with other topics, economic issues, social issues, and I can sense the kind of temperature of the room from the comments on YouTube, and I just really want to understand the facts, what good immigration, what bad immigration is, what we should be considering as a country, because I'm a son of an immigrant. I live in a culturally diverse town of Bedford, and we don't really have any integration issues. Kind of people get on well. I know that's not true everywhere. But some of the comments on my YouTube have become kind of like outright racism. And so I want to know the facts. I want the listeners to know the facts rather than have topics which kind of rile people up, because it's you know what it's like with politics. Everything becomes a hot potato, and I know you guys at Migration Watch are probably a lot closer to the facts of migration.
I hope so in all sorts of ways. But I mean, you say you're an immigrant yourself, or
son of one. My dad's Irish, so his dad moved to England when he was 9. Economic migrant. There was no work in Ireland, so he moved to Blackburn and worked on the trains. And so my dad came across with him, and lived in England till he was 61, and then retired back to Ireland.
Well, I came as an 8-year-old, a month short of my 8th birthday, from Cyprus.
Huh.
But are you really an immigrant coming from Ireland? I wouldn't class you as an immigrant as such. Yeah, sure, you moved from one country to another.
Yeah.
But your connections with Britain, the United Kingdom, go a hell of a long way.
I was nearly Cypriot myself.
Were you?
Yes, I was conceived in Cyprus. My dad was working there at the airport, turning the planes around, and I was nearly born there. And then my mum came back to England for me to be born because she needed help. But I would have had a Cypriot passport. Very close.
Well, you never know your luck. What might happen in the future? Perhaps you'll get an opportunity. Funnily enough, I don't have a Cypriot passport. I never have had. I was born in Cyprus when Cyprus was part of the British Empire, and came over here before Cyprus independence, and effectively remained British. I'm a, shall we say, a Windrush generation of Commonwealth migrant.
Yeah. Well, let's get straight into this. As I think a starting point would be you guys at Migration Watch. If we outline what it is you try and do, then we can understand the position from this conversation,
sure.
So people understand.
Well, just to explain a little about Migration Watch, it was set up by Sir Andrew Green as he was then, and Professor David Coleman, a professor of demography at St John's, Oxford. In 2002, really, it got going. And at that time, Migration Watch were really the only people around who were pointing to migration, pointing out the impact of migration, and advocating for more reasonable levels of migration, going back right then. The reason being that everyone was saying, migration is a great thing. It builds, it creates wealth. It grows the economy. GDP grows. Blah blah blah. That went on for about 20 years. We were saying, hold on a moment. Some immigration contributes, but the vast majority of those coming here are not going into sort of high-level engineering, medical jobs. They're ordinary people. They're not earning enough to be contributing. And we were making that sort of point, as well as the fact that we were bringing in people whose, shall we say, the foundations of the societies that they hail from were not quite in line with the sort of society that they were joining. When my parents came here and brought me, my father came in 1950, my mother and I came in 1956. When we came here, we were committing to this country. It went on, for what it's worth, to make me whatever I am today, good or bad. Some would argue that I joined the establishment almost. I joined the diplomatic service, became Her Majesty's, as it was then, ambassador. So, very much a part of this society. And that is what really is no longer happening, I think, in large part. I mean, I can
please
develop that if you wish. People who come here, we say, they've got to integrate. Well, integration is a two-way street. It's not a case of us making it easy for those who are coming here. Integration is about accepting, about becoming a part of the society that you have chosen to join, or your parents chose to join. And that's what is now, I would argue, is not happening in the way that it did 50, 60 years ago. The other thing that's happened, because of the scale of migration, I mean, now it beggars belief that we've got to the levels that we have. Firstly, it's not contributing to the economy. It's not making us all richer, as even Keir Starmer admitted only last week. And secondly, as groups, ethnic minorities formed into groups of wherever it was that they've hailed from, as that happened and sort of critical mass really was being reached, then I would say, so people coming here that you're saying should integrate, what exactly are they integrating with? And that's what's become so much more difficult now, so that we are no longer a homogenous society. We're not longer, we don't any longer have a shared backstory, a shared history, a shared culture. And that is happening ever more rapidly. And in happening as rapidly as it is, I would also argue that it's building tensions from within, people going in different direction. And that, I just don't think it bodes well for the future of our society.
That makes me think I had David Starkey in here 2 weeks ago, and he encouraged me to read a couple of books. One was The Origins of English Individualism. He's encouraged me to read this book, so I think that might be a nod towards what you're talking about. So I'm interested to get into that book and see what he means by that. Okay, so has this been a situation where it's been, we haven't really had the eye on the ball? Is it been policy failure? Has it been a misunderstanding? Has it been a need for migration because they've wanted to top up GDP? Is it all of that?
All of that.
All of that.
And also a lot of naivety and blind, really a blind approach to reality, ignoring reality, brushing it to one side for fear of offending, for fear of being proven wrong. I don't know. I mean, there are all sorts of areas where I think, firstly, immigration clearly has contributed a hell of a lot. Your parents, my parents, me, dare I say, lots of people like us have contributed because they've accepted what it was they were joining. Immigration in the 50s, incidentally, the proportion of ethnic minorities, the ethnic minority proportion in the early 50s was something like 4%. It was still only 5% in 1991.
Oh, wow.
In the 1991 census, that's what it was, 5%. In 2021, that 5% had increased to 25%. So all of a sudden, you've got that element of the population growing exponentially and at speed, because the contribution to population by migration really didn't change very much. I know people go about the Huguenots and the East African Asians and the Jews at various times, but it was minuscule, absolutely minuscule. So that is one huge factor in what has sort of driven the perceptions that maybe migration is not all it was cracked out to be. And that really, that's not going to get any better, any easier. The levels of migration, which as we'll come back to in a moment, are really vast, beyond anything that we can cope with.
Yeah, we had those numbers from Matt Goodwin at that previously, didn't we? Where I can't remember what year. Do you remember the chart? I think Connor might be able to bring it up because this was the one that blew my mind. I'll see if Connor can find it, but it was suddenly at some point we'd had kind of fairly net neutral migration, maybe slight increase.
In 1990s, we were fairly much in balance, if not a bit less, frankly.
Yeah,
it was the post-Blair New Labour. At that point, when New Labour came into office, we had migration at sort of manageable levels. It was soon after that things began to change. In the early 2000s, of course, it was the wave of Eastern European migration, which we were told by the experts that it was going to be only between sort of 5,000 and 13,000, I think, a year. Well, it was a great deal more than that. And we indeed at the time said, that those figures are worthless. It's going to be a great deal more than that. And what we projected at the time to the couple of million people that it would eventually come, that was what turned out. And yet, I can't believe that the government at the time didn't know that was going to happen.
Was that part of free movement in the EU?
That was part of free movement. It was. But you will also see that at various points, non-EU migration was also growing. And in fact, when we left the EU, the non-EU migration was really a great deal more higher than EU migration. But at one point, it got to be almost equal.
So here, Connor's got UK net migration. Keir Starmer's promised to bring down net migration. Many others have pledged the same. So here we go. So about between 95 and 2000, it was under 100k a year. Probably looks like at about 98, it was about 50k. And then in the early 2000s, we've jumped to about 200k. And by mid 2005, 300k, and it's bounced around up and down up until about 2020, where we had a drop. That might have been COVID year. And then we've gone 500,000 800,000, 800,000, 700,000. That's
906,000.
906,000.
728,000 now. And we're having the next set of figures issued on Thursday. But
these are huge numbers, though. These are huge. I mean, even the slow creep, feels like a slow creep from, say, 98 to 2005. In about a decade, we've gone from 50K to 300K-ish a year. That itself is a big jump. That is us expecting over, say, a space of a decade to have a net increase of 3 million. But we've almost done the same in the last 3 years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Interestingly, Keir Starmer, others say that a cap doesn't work. It's arbitrary, blah, blah, blah. In fact, if you look at those figures, you'll see that post-2010, when the coalition was in office, Theresa May was Home Secretary, they brought in various measures, including one of a cap on skilled migration. And by 2012, the numbers had actually, they decreased by quite a bit. It was after that all of a sudden they started shooting up again. And then in 2013-14, Romania and Bulgaria gained access to the free movement to the market. It was their treaty right. And again, at that time, Migration Watch, we said, I know Romania, I served there, I know it well, and I argued vehemently that there was no question that Romanians would not come here, if for no other reason because they could. In 2012-13, the population of Romanians in this country was something around 90,000 or thereabouts. It's now over 500,000. And again, an example of where immigration suddenly out of control grows to the point where it's putting pressure, services. It's in fact, it's not just the level, but the nature of the sort of migration that we get. Low skill, low pay, or lower skill and lower pay, shall we say, where there's no question that the people earn enough money to cover the cost of simply living in this country, which the OBR and the Home Office have calculated each additional person who comes into the country, they cost £20,000 a year. By the time they reach retirement age, they will have cost the state or taken from the exchequer £190,000 a year. If they live on to 80, that goes to £500,000. And if they're lucky enough to get to the century, then you're talking about £1 million. So all that is steadily building up. So the argument that we need lots of young migrants because we're aging, and all you're doing effectively is storing up trouble for the future, while at the same time, certainly not adding to GDP per head, if anything, taking away from it.
The humble bee, a keystone species crucial to the survival of Earth's inhabitants. Here's how things would look if bees vanished. And here's how they'd look if humans vanished. But imagine if instead we became a keystone species by doing things the right way, by taking responsibility for our actions and becoming the solution. Iron mines the world's most responsible currency the right way. Because the future depends on it.
What are the reasons we jumped so significantly over the last few years? Because a jump from, what was it, about 200,000, 200 to 300,000 that we've seen to suddenly 960,000, how did that just suddenly happen?
A number of reasons. Firstly, let's look back to Boris Johnson. What happened after the 2019 election, where we still hadn't actually left the EU. We didn't leave the EU until early 2021, effectively. There was a new immigration system going to be introduced, the points-based system. The points-based system, which was going to be an Australian type of points-based system. It was nothing like the Australian system, for one. And secondly, there was no real thought given to it because a points-based system, as used by the Australians, for example, but others as well, is designed to, bring in people, but it's capped. So you know how many you're going to bring in. What we did was actually put in place a system which was, it was laughably loose. There was, with regard to employment, we suddenly said, okay, there's no control over that. You can bring in people, as many as you like, if they have a certain qualifying level, a certain qualification threshold was put in place. But what we didn't know, Migration Watch did, but what most people didn't appreciate was that qualification threshold, which had been there for high skill migration, had been there a long time, that was immediately lowered to the equivalent of A-level, or roughly A-level.
Okay.
Secondly, employers were told you no longer have to look locally. You can go overseas, and if you're short, you can get people from overseas. And they did. They'd say, "Oh, thank you very much." They went in. We say, "Yeah, but it's high skill." It doesn't matter what skill levels are. If you're able to find people who, even if you're paying them above the threshold, are in fact going to cost you less than you would have to pay if you were employing people locally, then, why wouldn't businesses do that? I mean, there are good reasons why they shouldn't, but putting that aside a moment, that was what effectively happened with regard to employment.
Right.
Students as well. Now, students, but they come temporary and they leave and they go off and they're ambassadors for Britain. Nonsense. Total rubbish. The vast majority of young students now coming into the country are coming in, they're looking for a bit of the sort of life and lifestyle that you and I mostly enjoy. They're young people coming from countries where they haven't got a job. They haven't got any prospects. They haven't got any job that they sort of can even aspire to. So they make their way here ostensibly to study and go back. A huge number out of the 450,000 or so that come in every year. The government at various times has had targets of 600,000 coming in and have hit that target, 600,000 coming in. There's categories of student who actually have been able to, up until the Tories ended it last year belatedly, bring in their dependents as well. So you could sign up for a university master's degree in anything from really not exactly a renowned university known for its the quality of the education. And they came in droves and brought their families in as well.
Hold on, that sounds like it's a loophole to exploit. that if you're willing to pay the £9,000 tuition fee, you can get you and your family in.
Pete, that's exactly what I said when the government proposed it. They proposed it, and I said, this is a loophole which you will live to regret.
Have we tracked the data on the students coming in and how many actually graduate?
It's not a case of, I mean, a lot of them do graduate.
But I'm wondering if any just come in, pay their fee and just stay and don't even go to university. I wonder if they see it as an entry price.
Yes, of course there are. The huge numbers. And even that was sort of made easier. Look, one of my first jobs overseas, I was still in the Home Office. I was an immigration officer working at Dover and Heathrow and stamping passports. And I was seconded to the Foreign Office for a period of 4 years in Lagos. And so I spent 4 years in Lagos, really seeing thousands of young Nigerians, all Nigerians, lovely people. My wife and I and kids loved it there. There were those who would come to me and say, they would have sort of minimal qualifications, maybe a few GCEs as they were then, sometimes A-levels, but often not. They say, right, I want to go to Britain to study. I've been accepted at this place. I want to study to become a doctor, a nurse. I want to become a mechanic. So fine, you've got the course, you've got the money. I knew from where they were from, there was a store of knowledge in the High Commission of the sort of parts of the country that these youngsters came from, what sort of education they'd had, what they could look forward to in due course. And it was always very clear those who, with the best will in the world, would not be coming back. And likely sort of not actually managed very well with their studies either. If they had a bit of money, if they'd paid for their fees, the sort of higher level of students, the universities, if I pointed out to them that, I don't think that this individual sort of comes up to scratch with regard to what you're asking for, and they would say, nothing to do with you, mate. Just send them here. We'll sort them out.
Well, they're desperate for their tuition fees because they're under pressure.
Yeah. I mean, I'm talking about 40 years ago.
Oh, okay.
But that, in fact, it grew, and particularly after fees were introduced, which was roughly the time that I was in Nigeria in the early 80s. Fees were introduced, and gradually, as these rose, as universities which had sort of exploded in number, I think it was John Major actually who was responsible, where the number of universities virtually doubled overnight.
Well, I was the final year where university fees were free. I was the cutoff. The year after me, they were
You look a lot younger, Pete.
I'm 47, so I was 18, born in 78, 88, 96, 97 fees were introduced.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to work out, do the math and logistics of this. If you come in with, say,
that was fees for
tuition
us.
fees. Okay.
Yeah, but before that, foreign students, they were required to pay a lot earlier than that.
But even if you're coming in now, do foreign students pay the same £9,000 a year as?
No, they pay a lot more.
They pay a lot more.
They pay a lot more. And that's why, of course, they became attractive, because along with the loosening of the immigration system, you then had these added pressures on universities. Mm. They were not getting as much as they needed or they thought they deserved, but that aside, they needed more money. And foreign students became a bit of a cash cow, frankly.
But if you come in as a foreign student, you suddenly have full access to our healthcare system.
In an emergency, yes, of course you do.
Yeah.
Anyone. I mean, in theory, you pay the health surcharge, which has gone up now. But in practice, and certainly after you've been here a while, and people say take students out, but students, if you come here and you're here for 5, 6, 7 years, how do you not then sort of make demands on the economy, on services, on housing? You're there. You're a human being. You're living here. You've every right to be here. You're putting extra demand on in areas which the exchequer, the taxpayer, the government pays for. So, but just you asked why suddenly we had this explosion in migration. I mean, they were the sort of the bread and butter areas. In addition to that, of course, there was Ukraine, there was Hong Kong, and I know 200,000, 250,000 Ukrainians have come here, getting on for 200,000 Hong Kongers, that sort of area of people that we said you can come in. And not only to the Hong Kongers, not only did we say you can come in, but it was an open-ended invitation. So, even now, even though it's eased off, what's to say that in 3, 4, 5 years' time, Beijing suddenly doesn't say, actually, you and your types, we don't like here, and put pressure on them to leave, or indeed the way of life there becomes intolerable. What we've said is that the British National Overseas Passport holders have an invitation to come whenever they want to. And not only can they come, but it's a path to settlement. And it was Priti Patel who actually put that in place. So, there's a hostage to fortune if ever there was one. With the Ukrainians, yeah, I mean, when the first invasion took place, everyone was, we were all Ukrainians. Said, yeah, you can all come over temporarily. Well, it's 3 years now. Is it likely to end any time soon? I don't think so. What happens when it does end? Will all those who are here now be going back to Ukraine? Or indeed, will those that they left behind end up joining them here?
Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma because they may be settled, they may have children and now settled in school, settled to a way of life, might not be attracted to going back to a country rebuilding itself. We know that the Ukrainian government essentially put a block on any fighting age men leaving. As you say, they might come and join their wives and children. Yeah, it seems like that's a tricky one. It's a war. I'm glad we can welcome people in a war.
I'm not passing comment on what we did then on.
But explain the
I would have sort of made it a little tighter than it actually was at the time. You got very emotional, and you've got to think about your own country in the future, and if you're actually potentially bringing in something that could become a problem in the future, that should be factored in. I don't think it ever was.
I think probably more likely is if migration had been under control and our economy had been bustling and doing very well, I think we probably would have accepted that one. But when you put it in the mix of everything else, is that we seem to have just a large frictionless way of entering our country, and that's affected, as you say, the GDP per capita, which is a much more important figure than GDP itself. And that's where we see the pressures. And then when you get in here we go. So
up to 1.2% of the UK population
in a year. Yeah, 1%, 1.2% increase, 1.3% increase in the population. It's a lot of it's a lot of pressure for a country to take.
It is, and that probably underplays it to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And that is, again, a point that Migration Watch have long argued, going back to 2008-9, when we were saying exactly this, that it may be a case of growing GDP, but GDP per head, and it's flatlined for the last 10, 15 years. It's gone up a little bit, come down, and that this has happened at a time when we were told that all this mass migration was going to lead to everyone being better off and the country being so much wealthier, and all those shock horror stories from the Treasury, Osborne when he was Chancellor at the time of the referendum, when how much we would lose by turning our backs on the EU. Well, it was all balls, frankly, and that is now coming to light. And said earlier, I mean, Keir Starmer has actually acknowledged this now. Last week he referred to, in a mealy-mouthed sort of way, that perhaps immigration was not quite the economic benefit that everyone said, especially the Treasury and the OBR was saying it was. And that's the position that we're in at the moment. And the figures speak for themselves. The fact is that there are probably a lot more people here. We did some number crunching not so long ago with regard to the number of people illegally here. Pew Research, sort of a respected research organisation in the States, they said, well, in 2017, that the illegal population in Britain was higher than anyone else. They put it at around 700,000. In fact, we knew it to be higher than that, for the simple reason that we'd been keeping an eye, along with the Mayor of London, who was Boris Johnson at the time, although he kept it quiet, I think. But the LSE found that in the early 2000s, there were possibly around 600,000 here illegally, mostly in London. Now we are, given the rates of migration that we've had, it's probably a lot higher than that. 1.5 to 2 million, maybe, throughout the country. But let me just be clear. Let's separate illegal and legal migration. Legal migration overall is probably, the inflow anyway, is something like 20 times greater than the boats crossing the channel. Mm-hmm. We're talking about something that is long-term, is so much more serious. Although, people are sort of fed to the teeth with the unfairness of young men making their way here illegally, and it is illegally. Well, you can dress it up any way you like, but jumping in a flimsy dinghy from an unauthorized point to get over to this country for the simple purpose of getting yourself accepted so that you can work, that's not what fleeing persecution is all about. Apart from which, they've all come from safe countries. But that, as I say, in a way, that is
red herring,
a lesser problem. And it's why I think not just Keir Starmer's government, but the previous governments as well, Rishi Sunak in particular, wanted this focus on the boats, wanted to focus on illegal migration, on asylum. Well, yeah, because they thought they could actually show some progress. And if they showed some progress, people wouldn't look so much at illegal migration, which is it doesn't really show up for a while. And by the time it's shown up, it's too late. Then we're talking about integration rather than actually stopping it. And that, I think, all governments really over the last 15 years have been culpable to a greater or lesser extent with regard to allowing legal migration to get out of control. I've touched on some areas. Let me give you another example that is of how things get out of control. There was a lot of fuss a few years ago about how care homes. We're short of care workers. No one will take these jobs. Well, I would argue, pay a bit more, then perhaps there'll be more people locally prepared to take them. But that aside, the government said, yeah, we'll bring them in from overseas. And they came, 160,000, thereabouts. They came. Not only did they come, but we said they could bring their dependents as well. There were 60,000 Nigerians who came. There were more dependents who came with them than actual people coming to work in care homes. Some of them didn't last in care homes very long. But the point is that these, in order to address media pressure in many respects, governments opt for something that gives the impression of action and that you're dealing with it without giving any thought to consequences.
It's very important that you don't lose this, okay? This is your inheritance through Bitcoin.
Let Bitcoin rip. Don't rip up your Bitcoin. Set up inheritance with Casa.
That sounds typical for government.
What to think?
Well,
to show common sense.
I mean, we cover a number of topics on this show, and most of the time we're covering issues, problems, because there's a lot of problems the country's facing at the moment, and it often comes down to incompetence within government.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what topic we touch on. It's a lack of competence within government.
Yeah.
We see these figures from the ONS and the OBR. They often tend to be wrong. We see projections from government. They often tend to be wrong. We see manifesto promises, which governments go back on. We're in a very strange time at the moment where government appears to be failing in almost everything they're doing.
Yeah, they fail because they promise things they must know they can't possibly deliver. And each time they make a promise that they don't keep, then a little bit of confidence and a little bit of faith in your government erodes further. That people just don't believe politicians by and large. There are exceptions, I have to say. Mm-hmm. But by and large, the political system has let down the people time and time again, and that's why. I suppose there are those now who are capitalising on that. It remains to be seen whether once any different party, whoever ends up in government, or a government with different policies or a party with different policies to the ones that they were in before, whether that actually makes any difference and whether they deliver. But it's so important, Pete. It's so critically important that we do get a grip of this and get a grip of it quickly. Population growth at the moment, which is unprecedented, the population that we are growth that we're getting at the moment, is entirely driven by migration, migrants and their children, with We've got net migration of 728,000. See whether that goes up or down. That was the last figure. Whether they will say in hindsight we should have said it was a bit more or whatever. We'll see on Thursday. However, that order of migration, net migration, which in a way sort of hides the fact that the inflow is much higher than that. So you're talking about 1 million, 1.2 million people actually coming in, and fewer people leaving, but the fewer people leaving includes Brits leaving.
Some of the wealthy high taxpayers.
Indeed. But that all this has an impact on population, and it also has an impact on the mix, the demographic mix of our population. So I referred earlier to 5%, 25%, closing in on 30% now, I imagine. Well, that with the present population, with the present immigration scale, we're looking at another 20 million people from the last census, 20 million people within the next 25 to 30 years. I mean, that's extraordinary.
Yeah.
We're going to get to the point where people like you, and I include Ireland, Scots, Welsh, English, what I've been criticised for referring to as indigenous, but native Brits, they will in fact be a minority. You will be a minority in this country. And nothing to do with colour, it's just that people who are not they don't have a British heritage going back, they will become a minority in the country of their forebears. I don't think that many people fully understand that this is what's happening, or indeed are aware that it's happening, because we're never asked. People, they sort of talk about 100,000, 50,000, whatever. Well, it's a lot more than that, is all I'm saying. The scale of immigration is so huge. And that, well, there are those who say, well, so what? Well, is there any other country in the world, apart from maybe some Gulf states, where there may be more guest workers than there are locals, but my goodness, they keep them in tight check? That's something that we wouldn't want to do. We can't do anyway. So I'm not suggesting that we sort of we hammer migrants. I'd have to watch out, but
there are consequences. I think what you're saying is there's consequences to this.
There's huge consequences.
Are we prepared? Do we understand them? And
we are importing problems for our economy. We're importing problems for our society. And in a way, we're also importing conflicts from around the world. There are divisions in certain parts of the world, wherever, be it South Asia, be it in Africa. You're bringing in people that are sort of they're sort of hammering each other from the countries that they come from. And that clearly is going to have an impact on everyone else.
Well, it's an uncomfortable conversation for some people to have, especially from those on the left. They don't want to accept those consequences. Ideologically, they want to believe that we should be a nation open to anyone and welcoming anyone into this country. I think that's also bled into large parts of the Conservative voter base, has not historically not wanted to have this conversation. And now suddenly everybody wants to have this conversation. And you know what? I want to be fair to Labour. I would never vote for Labour. I'm just, this is not kind of person I am. I'm a small government person.
I'm really, Migration Watch has never said vote for this or vote for that or this party or that party. Sorry.
But I want to be fair to them. It does feel like they've attacked it better than the Conservatives have recently. They've at least, I mean, I think it's been a very tough thing for Keir Starmer to do, because he knows, any strong policies on migration, it's not something his base, the traditional Labour base, want to hear. I mean, he was hammered for saying we've become a nation of strangers. They were comparing him to Enoch Powell. But it feels like he is trying to attack this issue head on. How well are they doing? Is it smoke and mirrors?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
However, I do welcome what they've done, what they've said. And I've welcomed the change of tune, even though there are those who would question as to how sincere it is, and how much he means it. But nevertheless, I do welcome what he has said, particularly with regard to an island of strangers, because that is exactly what is happening. There are the scale of immigration, they've said that it's too high, it's got to come down. Where I would take issue with them is when you look at the white paper that was sort of bells and whistles and lights flashing last week was launched. When you actually look at it, there's very little in there. Now, I accept that, and I welcome anyone who, on the road to Damascus is there suddenly saying, "Oh, hello, Alp. Yeah, I agree with you," and that's important. It's an important issue, and to be fair to Starmer, it was a courageous thing to do. Whether there are those who perhaps cynically say, "Yes, but why did he do it? How much did this have to do with the election results a couple of weeks ago, with the local election results, with reforms, advances, and indeed changes within the Conservative Party to effectively saying what Starmer is now also joined in and saying, it doesn't matter. So long as they actually look seriously at the scale of immigration, what it's doing, and what they are going to do about it in order to reduce it. Look, net migration is what we always go on about, because that's what impacts, and that is what population projections are based on. So it's important. But net migration really is only part of the story. It's the numbers is only part of the story. The real issue is the impact that it's having on the country, and the impact that it's going to have on the country. And that's why it's so important, so critically important for the future of our country, that we get a grip now. And even with net migration at zero, there are those who are saying now, in addition to net migration, the number coming in equal to the number leaving, some are saying, no, it should be fewer coming in than the number who are leaving. Sorry, the other way around. And also saying that maybe we should encourage people to leave, remigration, paying people, the sort of thing that Denmark has done.
Sorry, tell me what Denmark has done.
What they're doing is effectively saying to people, yeah, you go back and we'll give you a little pot of gold to...
And that's been successful?
To get started with. Well, along with other measures that Denmark has introduced, yes, it's been successful in cutting down the numbers of asylum seekers, which is also linked to numbers leaving and why they're coming here, not just in boats, because the vast majority of people seeking asylum, in fact, came in legally. Certainly last year, that's what happened. But they've also they've got rules like no area can have more than 40% migrant. When it gets to that stage, they can't move there. They are taking valuables off arrivals to pay for whatever it's going to cost to keep them while we're there. A whole series of measures like that have discouraged people from making their way to Denmark. Now, I'm not. I don't know if there were a government that was prepared to do some of that. It would certainly have an impact. I don't think whichever government is in place is likely to do that. Although, what a lot of people don't know, the government is saying, we've removed 24,000 people since we've come into office. We've sent them back to their countries. Last August, there was 606 Brazilians who were sent back to Brazil. When the Brazilian ambassador was asked about this, he said, it's not a problem, they're all volunteers. Not only were they volunteers, but each one, including babies, got £3,000 a head. Nice, really. Go back to Brazil for Christmas, as it happened with, if there were 5 of you, 15 grand in your pocket. Yeah, a lot of people would do that. So I'm maybe that's something that we should consider. In the long run, it would be a lot cheaper to encourage people to leave who don't particularly like it here or haven't quite made it here. If they want to go back to their own countries, I see no problem in helping that process along.
But that's just one small tactic. Get a grip.
Well, we haven't tried.
Yeah, when you say get a grip, it sounds like we need some very strong policies.
We do. And I think the strongest policy has to be based on some sort of cap. If you don't have a cap, David Cameron, Theresa May, tens of thousands, and in fact, even after them, it was the manifesto promise of getting net migration down to tens of thousands, below 100,000.
We're a long way off that.
We were a way, way long way off that. What in applying a cap on skilled migration, were they of a mind to apply that across the board and say there will not be more than so many people coming into the country? And you can look to see, if you look at the history of people coming into the country, into certain jobs, coming in for employment, well, you can quickly work out the extent to which they may need workers in the future. And you say, a cap on the number of work visas issued. You can make exceptions if you like. You can have a cap on the number of family members coming here, which will no doubt go against human rights laws. But you can say, okay, there will be so many family visas issued this year. You could say to the universities, you could say to each university, this is our overall cap, and you will have, so many within that cap. It's that sounds cumbersome and unworkable. I don't believe it is, because other countries do that. You will always get illegal immigration, by whatever means. I think it would be relatively easy to stop boats coming across the channel by simply detaining all those who arrive and sending them back. Well, the French won't have that. But nevertheless, were we to do that, it would stop overnight. I hope that at some point the EU, France, other countries who really have got very porous borders, they see the sense as well. Now, if we want then to say, right, we will take so many refugees and have a cap on that. We've had all sorts of schemes. Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq. We've had people working with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. We've selected people who've come in that they're coming in controlled in a manageable fashion in a way that we can afford, or to the extent that we can afford it. At the moment, there are groups within this country who advocate that, it's our responsibility to take anyone who's in trouble, anyone who's, in a war, or anyone who's gay, who is in a country where gays are not very popular, to say the least. I have no problem with reaching out to those who genuinely need a helping hand.
But people understand what the rules are, and then it becomes gamed.
Yeah, well, it's exactly what's happened.
So what would be an appropriate cap? What would be appropriate number, appropriate target?
I would have it at a level which doesn't increase net migration. I would have it at a level that is not adding exponentially to our population, and it's controllable. You can do it. And I think that is the main objective of population, of immigration control, because in doing that, you're not only serving the interests of your country now, but you're also serving the interests of your country in the future. And that, I think that immigration, by and large, and there will be sort of people who qualify in all sorts of ways, be it for compassionate reasons but there's never any hard and fast rule. But immigration should be in the interests of the people who live here, in the people who've paid into the system, in the interests of the people whose ancestors were here and have created the country that we all enjoy now. That's the level of migration that I would like, and they are the objectives of any future migration, with those certain caveats that I've entered.
What kind of number is that, though?
Well,
are we talking? Is it under 100,000?
Net migration is, as I say, number going out and the people coming in.
Well, no, but
so we need some sort of balance.
Yeah.
So because it's got so out of hand, because the population now, we need time actually to prepare and to deal with the numbers that have come in already. Angela Rayner is saying, she wants to build 1.5 million homes in the course of this parliament. Pie in the sky.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
The number of people coming in and are going to come in, we're going to need those houses, let alone those already here. So really, what we need to do now to address the problem is actually act firmly and bring in people that equate to the number of people leaving. That addresses the population increase.
So I asked the question for a reason. Say it was 100,000, because if we've got 500,000 students coming in every year, does that mean we could potentially have to turn away 400,000 students?
No. If students were made to leave at the end of their courses, then in time, those coming in
better policy
would be balanced out by those who are leaving. But at the moment, many come in without any control and are able to stay on.
So that it requires a tougher student visa.
Not just student, but yes, certainly, absolutely.
But with no dependence, you come here, you complete.
No dependence.
You come in, you complete.
No
the
dependence,
course.
and not only no dependence, but the government brought down the post-study work route, which was 2 years. It's proposing to bring it down to 18 months. That won't dissuade anyone from coming, frankly. And not only will there be many who come, but also many who will stay on as well.
Yeah, and I guess if a student comes in and becomes a doctor, a high skilled engineer, a solicitor, a high earner, a net contributor, we kind of would be happy for them to stay because they're a net contributor.
Sure, yeah. But that would be part of the overall net migration number, so that if you're saying we're going to allow these people who would otherwise leave to stay, then that would be factored into whatever number you arrive at for sort of overall net migration.
When do you think it would be a fair time to judge how Labour are doing? Is it the next set of figures, or do we need to give them a year?
I think you'll find that there will be any number of points at which we're going to say, you see, it's not working because, and that's not to say that, as we started off, not to welcome what appears to be the direction that Keir Starmer is pointing to. But that was another area that I took a little issue with when you looked at the white paper and what was being proposed, such as it was. We're talking about discussions, we're talking about studies by the Migration Advisory Committee, we're talking about consulting with employers and universities. I mean, that's the sort of area that we're in at the moment. So, Lord knows when legislation will actually, insofar as legislation is needed. There's so many things that I've been talking about that don't need legislation. You can do them, you can introduce them as immigration rules, immigration measures, and through existing legislation. That's not going to happen anytime soon. There's a bill going through at the moment, the Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill, title that long. That, if anything, that bill, when it becomes an act, in fact, even now, because of areas that have been abandoned, measures that have been abandoned, policies that have been abandoned, even the fact that this bill is being introduced eventually to become an act, probably within 18 months, I don't know, no time soon anyway, that has served the purpose of encouraging the smugglers, encouraging the traffickers and the gangs, and certainly not discouraging the young men who are primarily jumping into the boats and paying a lot of money for it.
It sounds like you're saying this, whilst this is a complex issue, dealing with it isn't so complex. It's more about will to deal with it, to be hard, to be tough on policy.
Yeah, with regards to illegal migration, I think it's being brutal almost to be kind, and that there's lots of people will come, lots of people will end up in the black economy. They're going to end up dying coming across, and that we can avoid that quite easily in doing what I suggested we should. With regard to legal migration, yeah, it does take political will. Sir Keir Starmer's government has a huge majority in Parliament, frankly. they could pass legislation that says day is night if they wanted to. There's absolutely nothing holding them back from doing that. I mean, we've seen yesterday, today, the reset with the EU. I'm not at the moment certain as to the extent that that is actually going to be helpful. Brexiteers are, as you know, vehemently against. Remainers, just to use the short term, they welcome the fact that we appear to be closer to the EU now, and maybe they think, yeah, well, this is only the first step. So, it will be a little while before we know whether it's proved to be the great sort of reset and a beneficial reset that Sir Keir Starmer is claiming it to be. I'm not sure that it will be, frankly. I'm not sure that it's going to make a huge amount of difference, apart from the fact that I suppose we've reseeded a bit of our sovereignty, which a lot of people would be strongly against, and probably what prompted many of them to have voted out rather than immigration.
So on this podcast, you are definitely hearing me talk about Bitcoin a lot. Well, why? We live in a really strange time with governments driving inflation with their reckless spending and endless money printing. There is a way out of this. There is a way to protect your money, and that is by stacking Bitcoin. I've made loads of shows about Bitcoin. You can go and research this, you can go and read the books, but the truth is it is the hardest money ever created. If you are interested in protecting your financial future, it's time for you to get on the Bitcoin train. I've been stacking Bitcoin personally and through my businesses since 2017. It's protected me, it's secured my family's future, and it also strengthens all of my businesses. So if you want to start stacking Bitcoin, where do you do it? Well, for me, it's with Gemini. They're a fully licensed, full reserve exchange and custodian, so they give you a secure way for you to buy and own your Bitcoin. There's no risks and no funny business. So if you're serious about stacking Bitcoin the right way, head over to Gemini.com, which is GEMINI.com. Yeah, I think it's going to be one of the key points for voters in the next election, like it was in the US with Donald Trump. And they had a massive issue with immigration across the border. Millions of people coming in. It felt like it was almost actively encouraged. Like the Biden administration wanted a high levels of immigration because they wanted these people to end up being voters who would vote for the Democrats. Seems to have backfired. But it also feels like Donald Trump has dealt with it fairly quickly.
Well, yeah.
If I'm seeing it incorrect, you should say.
Well, let's see what happens. But certainly I think what Trump has shown is that with the will and the sheer blind-mindedness, you can do anything. Our government is not quite shaped around the Prime Minister in the way that the government of the United States is built around the President. But even so, yeah, I think that anything is possible if you have the will in our system. Our Parliament is supreme, and Parliament really, it can do anything it wants within reason. I mean, we do have a constitution as well, even though people say it's not a written constitution. Nevertheless, there is a framework of our parliamentary system that lends itself to a lot of flexibility, and that with the EU, well, let's see what happens. There are going to be a lot of people in the red wall, should we say, as one example, who are going to be decidedly unhappy. The fisheries areas expressing their unhappiness about what has happened. that we'll only know, how strongly they feel about that come the next election. And really what Keir Starmer said last week about the changing nature, an island of strangers. There are those who would argue, well, maybe, as I said earlier, that was as much intended to draw attention away from the fact that he was having this apparent reset and cozying up to the EU. What I would say is that the EU has exactly the same problems with regard to migration. And at the moment, there are EU member states who are actually going a lot further than some. We could find ourselves in a position where we're actually having people from within the EU, let alone countries like Switzerland, or who are sort of connected but not really part of the EU. We're going to have those sort of countries who are saying, actually, we want to do what the Brits tried to do and abandoned. We want to try and send people to overseas processing centres, to third countries, safe places where they can hear their asylum applications. So that there are certain imponderables at the moment that will have an effect on how people perceive what has gone on, and indeed on what the performance of the government will be in doing what they say they want to do. But I wish that they would really move away from this business of, we won't have a cap, we won't have any limits, artificial limits. They're not artificial limits. You can work them out. You're the government, for goodness sake. And as the government, you should know exactly where it is that immigration is needed. And that, I would also argue, is what the people want. And if we're in a democratic country where democracy rules, not democratic values, democracy is about what the people want. People talk about populism. Populism is what ordinary people are calling for.
I know. I have a real issue with people using populism as a pejorative.
Absolutely.
I think I tweeted the other day something along the lines of, populism is the what did I put? The populism is the policies that the elites don't like.
I saw it.
Yeah, but populism is just a part of democracy, and I just think it's been used as a pejorative by snobby, middle class or elitist attitude people to say, you peasants over there, these issues are complex, you don't understand it.
It first started in Brussels.
Unsurprising
that as an attack on Farage. There was this heinous populist demagogue who really didn't know what he was talking about, and they laughed at him. What was it he said at the end?
I can't remember. Remind me. I know what you're talking about.
He said, well, you laughed at me. You're not laughing now.
Well, he's driven the conversation. But there are people saying even reforms policies don't go far enough, which I think is...
Well, it just shows the point that we've reached, for goodness sake. How far we've... The situation is so bad. It's declined and sank to some sort of unforeseen, unimaginable levels now. It's that bad. And unless we act quickly, it's going to get worse, and it's going to become totally unmanageable.
Well, it'd be destructive for the country.
Irreversible.
Yeah.
And that's what we're heading towards with the sort of migration. And people will say, well, look, I mean, what made me laugh was when the figures came out last November that net migration to mid-June had fallen to 728,000. And this was 20% less than it had been in the previous year to June, which was 906,000.
That's not the benchmark we want.
Yeah, I was dumbfounded, really, that people should make this argument when what we're really talking about is needing to bring migration levels down to not much more than balance, and do it in a way that will not impact on our economy or on our care homes or whatever. It's all about controlling immigration in the way that it needs to be controlled, in the interests of the people voting for the politicians who are there really to serve the interests of the country. And what happens with politicians, I've known over the last 40 years many politicians. I worked for some of them. I worked with some of them. And all of them are so well-intentioned. When they're first elected, they go through those gates into Parliament and they talk a good game. They're there saying, this is what we're going to do. This is what we need to do. Then gradually, perhaps they're attracted by a red box. Perhaps they're attracted by a car and a driver, all these things. And after a while, it becomes something that's sort of a debate within closed walls, really, that pays little regard to the people that have elected them to get there. They don't mean to do it. It's just the way it happens somehow. That they lose sight of the reason that they're there, and they're all patriotic and they all love their country. And I'm not disputing any of that. It's just the way that eventually, for whatever reason, they lose sight of what they're there for.
Well, I think they're either incompetent or lack courage to make tough decisions. It's easier sometimes to sit in the background and protect your career and the perks and benefits of being in Whitehall than to stand up and say, this is a problem. I think to be a politician, you have to be courageous. You have to make really tough decisions. And I think sometimes I think a lot of the people we have in Parliament now don't want to make tough decisions. Because look at that. I mean, look, even you agreed, and I agree it was quite great.
Even I agreed.
Well, no, we agreed as people, you didn't put a political loyalty out, but as somebody, I'm very anti the Labour Party. And I thought there was some courage in what Keir Starmer said. And I'm not here to hand out...
Yeah, I acknowledged that. I said that.
But that's what it took. It took him to really upset his base, to be accused of all kinds of things, to be called a racist and xenophobe and anti, what Labour stands for, and all these traditional lefties with their arms up in the air saying immigrants aren't the problem. This is just, rich billionaires and people like Farage who have polluted the discourse. He had to say that with all that, and he went ahead and did it. And that's what we need. We need courage in politicians. But I just don't think we have good politicians these days, or we don't have enough of them. And that, for me, is a major problem, which is why I think we've got, like I said on the show, we cover so many topics, and we're constantly talking about all the problems because there seem so many, and they all seem to be coming from government.
Yeah, I agree with so much of that. The politicians. Let me give you an example of something that happened not so long ago when I mentioned I was giving evidence to the Bill Committee, and the minister, the immigration minister, there we were going to talk about illegal immigration, the boats, the bill, which is what it was intended for, or what is intended for. And when it came to me, the minister said, "Oh, what do you mean by the word indigenous, which is on your website. I said, what? Nothing to do. Absolutely nothing to do. I mean, I knew exactly what she was driving at. You know,
I know.
She wanted to suggest that somehow Migration Watch was racist, or that. And indeed, when Professor David Coleman, he followed me to giving evidence. They asked him whether he was a white supremacist. I mean, this is, apart from being nasty, obnoxious stuff, really.
It's woke bullshit. I'll call it what it is.
It was, and I've said so ever since.
Yeah.
But the fact is, my point is, it gives you a sense of the underlying pressures and motives within the Conservative Party. And that goes back to, remember Andrew Nether, speechwriter, who wrote in 2011, I think, a piece in the Evening Standard. They are, look it up. He was saying how they wanted to rub the noses of the right in diversity. And that was part of the reason for, just championing diversity and multiculturalism. And that, again, Andrew Nether, I think, in a moment of openness that, I don't know, some might have regretted, but he gave an insight into what those who were responsible for immigration policy at the time were driving. Migrants would come in, as you mentioned, with regard to the Democrats in the United States. Let them come in because eventually they'll vote for us. Well, what we're finding now is that there are certain areas of the country where there were those who came into politics joining the Labour Party, gradually, actually particularly in local government, taking over the local associations, the local parties, and replacing the people who are running those associations with their own people. And I only say, take a look at Tower Hamlets, where the party in control there now is Aspire. And that they all pretty much started off with the Labour Party because the Labour Party thought they would all vote for them. and that's not unique by any means. And if you look at the members of Parliament who are elected in certain constituencies, the independents, they weren't they weren't asking people to vote for them in order to serve the interests of those people. They were more concerned about what was going on in Gaza. Now, that is not what, of course, our politics and our Foreign Office and, our government, yes, representing us is dealing with those sort of international issues. Members of Parliament should not get themselves elected because they're championing some cause overseas. And that there was other times. I know something that I read the other day, George Galloway, when he was standing for Parliament in Bethnal Green, he actually went to Sylhet to campaign to persuade people there to tell those who were voting for him in Bethnal Green to vote for Galloway. I mean, that, you've got, members of Parliament getting up saying, I want an airport built in this part of Pakistan because my constituents have connections there and they need it.
Wasn't that from where we're from? Is that the Bedford MP? No, it might be North Beds. I read about that one as well. Yeah, look. Yeah, I know. It's just all such a mess. It's all such a mess.
It is, and it's a worrying mess.
It is a worrying mess. But I feel like because there's so many issues, migration is an issue, the economy is an issue, the appearance of cover-ups for rape gangs is an issue, the size of the welfare state is an issue, the pension obligations is an issue. There's so many issues everywhere. I feel like we're heading to...
Can I interject there?
Yeah, have you got more?
And immigration is linked to all of them, every single one of them. And the scale of immigration is linked to that, tooth and nail.
But I feel like we're at it's almost like I don't think reform success is just based on them alone. I think reform success has been based on the fact that people are so fed up of the establishment failing them for really what has felt like we're in the third decade of absolute failure. And I think people are just hoping for something different, some sort of change, some sort of courage within government to do some big things, to make some big choices. I don't think these big issues can ever be solved by a Labour Party. I just don't think that's possible. I think the Conservative Party is in large parts impotent at the moment, and I don't know what they're going to do. So I think reform really is like, well, what else do I do? If I've seen my groceries get more expensive, and I've seen crime go up where I live, and then I'm shown photos of videos of hotels full of migrants, that's an issue that's going to affect me. And if I've got a party saying they're going to deal with it, then maybe that's why the votes go in there. But I feel like we're heading towards that kind of, I don't want to say revolution, because I think that's quite an extreme term, but that point in time where people are like, I've had enough, which is why I think reform's quite interesting, because their voters don't fit in one castle demographic. It is wealthy upper class down to the working class seem to be wanting something different. So I think we're going to hobble through to this next election. It's going to be very interesting.
I would add a group to that, young people.
Yeah, don't know, certainly. I mean, Connor, that's my son, by the way. And I talk to him about it a lot. There's a lot of young people who are fed up, who are sick of this. It can't get a house, can't get a job, have been told to go to university, leave with 30 grand debt, can't get a job. They're fed up.
Pete, since I retired from the diplomatic service in 2008, and I was involved with an organisation in Brussels, or Brussels-oriented organisation, great people. I joined Migration Watch. Andrew Green and I knew each other. As I mentioned earlier, he said, come and join me. And that was in 2009. So I've seen the lead up to the 2010 election, 2015, 2017, 2019. Each time Cameron was elected, Theresa May with a smaller majority, they were all elected on the basis that they would reduce immigration.
And none did.
None did. Boris pretended. I mean, that was the biggest con of all. I mean, he was always, as mayor of London, he was a great advocate of migration. I'm a great fan of immigrants and immigrants, he said. But he found that something that went down well on the doorstep during the referendum campaign, actually, but Australian-type points-based system would bring the people we need in and keep out the ones that we don't. And then introduce a system that had the opposite effect to the one he said was going to happen. Then Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, people were utterly fed up with the Tories. So the last time round, they weren't, as we all know, they weren't enthralled with Sir Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, but they wanted rid of the Tories. I think the Tories if they can get their act together, they've still got a contribution to make. But the next time round, people are going to say, well, who's actually going to do what they say they're going to do, which is what we want. And that's to cut immigration drastically and start thinking in terms of our country and our future. At that point, they will make their choice and they will put their cross against the appropriate name of who they believe is actually at least going to try seriously to achieve that.
Mm.
And that who that brings into office, let's wait and see. But I'm certainly reform, even the Tories now, they're beginning to talk a good game. Labour, it would seem, have also seen the light, and there are people in Labour behind the scenes who actually, who from the north, the Red Wall, they know exactly what's going on, and they know what people want. My late wife was from South Wales, from Caerphilly, mining both sides of her family. They were miners. It was the really part of the engine room of the Industrial Revolution, that bit of the United Kingdom. And all of them Labour supporting, every one of them ardent Labour supporters. But it was a very different Labour to the Labour that it became and it has become. It's really, if Labour genuinely mean what they say, and if Sir Keir Starmer is genuine in what he suggests is going to happen if immigration is not controlled, then I think that he will start coming up with the right sort of policies that will bring it about. Then he may be considered when it comes to it. If that happens, I don't care, frankly, if it's reform, if it's Tories, if it's Labour, so long as who is in office actually comes up with the right policies and is prepared to implement them, then I'll be happy.
4 years' time, then we'll probably find out.
Yeah, I mean, can I just 3 points I'd like to
Please.
make before we finish?
Yeah.
Why this is all so hellish important. Firstly, illegal immigration, hugely important now because you see it happening and it's getting more and more costly. Nevertheless, the number of people, net migration, and the number of people coming in legally dwarfs the number coming in across the channel. Immigration is now the only driver of population increase. The population increase itself is exponential. It's way, way beyond anything that we can cope with. And immigration, migrants and the children of migrants is driving that. And thirdly, just to make the point again, the ethnic minority proportion, all ethnic minorities together, are growing quickly as the indigenous, native British are shrinking in size. Within 25 to 30 years, if migration continues at the present level, we're looking at the native British actually being a minority or thereabouts. That has huge implications for the future of our country, as we know it and as we have known it. That, I think, is something that the British people do not want to see, and the British people need to be aware of. And I welcome the fact that you've given me an opportunity to say this and I know you've got hundreds of thousands of followers, and I'd be interested to know how they react to this.
Well, I can tell you how they react. It'll be a mixed reaction. There will be people too scared to discuss and accept the consequences of what you've said, because in their mind or ideologically, they feel like that would put them in the camp of being a racist, and they don't want to be that person. There will be people who 100% agree with you, and there will be people who are confused and don't know what to think. It'll be a range of the comments on YouTube are a very good temperature check for this kind of conversation. Now, my audience does swing conservative, so it's going to be more that agree that disagree. But there are, because they're hard to get on, but we would have people from left on the show. So there are people who from the left who listen to this, they'll be uncomfortable with some of this. They are comfortable conversations.
Well, look, all I would say to them is I'm not suggesting end immigration and send every migrant back. That no one in their right mind would be advocating that. Immigration, of course, it's contributed hugely to our country. What I'm saying is it's the way it's going to affect future developments, the future evolution of our country, if it continues at the sort of astronomical, stratospheric levels that it is at the moment. So what we're talking about is reducing immigration to the levels that we can cope with, and is not really likely to change our society beyond recognition.
Yeah, I don't think it's that uncontroversial.
Leads to an island of strangers, as the Prime Minister put it.
Yeah, I don't think it's that uncontroversial, but for some people it is very controversial. Look, we will see. We will see. But I really appreciate you coming in and talking about it, because it's definitely a hot topic. It's definitely something I've wrestled with myself a lot. Yeah, I've wrestled a lot with it. But, I look at the decline of this country.
Hey, look at me.
I know. I'm trying to do a lot locally where I live, and I am trying to understand this moral, cultural, economic decline of our country and how we reverse that trend. And this is certainly one of the most important subjects within it. So I appreciate you coming in, Alp. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thank you to everyone for listening. We'll see you all soon.